Ladies and gentlemen, welcome aboard the Wright Flyer. I'm Randy Wright, and I'll be your captain on this solo flight special edition of our state-of-the-art radio program. Folks, this will be the final boarding call, so if you please, claim your seats, fasten your seatbelts, kick back, relax, and enjoy the show while I go ahead and delve into the pre-flight checklist, as there really is a lot of news and information to get to before I may fully indulge you with your in-flight entertainment. Well, folks, we know that things have been difficult for the White House as of late. They have encountered scandal after scandal, and this has set back their agenda for the nation by quite a bit. And Trump is now well past the first 100-day mark of his administration, and things haven't quite gone to plan. Just as we here at Radio Aviation Excellence, the Wright Flyer, predicted that it wouldn't. Some of his followers will attempt to point the finger at things like the media or the House Freedom Caucus, which had stood up to his attempt to pretend to replace the so-called Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act, or Obamacare. But those sorts of things have always been there with any presidential administration. So Trump's biggest issue here, folks, is the fact that he is completely disorganized. And that is just one of those things that comes to the forefront time and again. It's as though he is winging it. And maybe you can do that when running a real estate empire, as the 45th president of these United States of America did before assuming the reins of political power in this once thriving and flourishing representative republic and vibrant community of popular sovereigns of ours. But as my first officer, Jeremy Grapenton, and I have oftentimes reiterated on previous episodes of Radio Aviation Excellence, the Wright Flyer, you cannot run the United States as a business. In the business world, it's all about the bottom dollar, which that's fine. That's great. That is how you propel a capitalist system forward. But when it comes to what matters to us both as a nation and people, and when it comes to our fundamental and inalienable rights, which were endowed to us by our Creator, who happens to be none other than the God of nature himself, those things are non-negotiable. They're non-delegable. They should never be placed on the bargaining table. But if you recall, all throughout the course of that disastrous debacle and fiasco known as the 2016 presidential election cycle, Trump had said everything is negotiable. And he touted himself as the great negotiator. He kept pointing to that book of his, The Art of the Deal, or is it The Art of the Squeal or The Art of the Steal? I always get confused with respect to that. But the problem here is that he doesn't seem to have any discipline. He doesn't seem to know when to act and when to keep his mouth shut. And therefore, he keeps digging an ever deeper hole for himself. Now, maybe this is part of that whole notion and image that he had attempted to create for himself of being a political outsider, a political neophyte. But I don't think that's what his acolytes and surrogates had in mind when they decided to champion him and to go all out in full support of him, because in a way it undermines what they want. It's certainly bogging his narrative and his agenda down, and that isn't going to be beneficial for him. That's not going to make him more accomplished. It's only going to cause this to look like abject failure, because he is losing control of the narrative. And yes, that is thanks due in no small part to the dark and twisted machinations of the rank and file of the graduates of Pavlov's School of Journalism for the salivating mainstream media, but they cannot be held accountable for this alone. You see, we all have to be ready, willing, and able to hold ourselves accountable, each other accountable, and most importantly, our elected officials accountable for our words, deeds, and actions. Accountability is what allows us to be determinate. Because remember, those two fundamental pillars that form the bedrock foundation of the American culture, identity, and society is that of self-accountability and self-responsibility working in tandem, thereby delivering unto us self-determination. But we've gotten away from that. And here's the thing. Like it or not, Trump is going to have to change the way he engages the world through social media. We here at Radio Aviation Excellence, the Wright Flyer, have oftentimes stated that social media is a double-edged sword. On the one hand, it allows you to reach the American people, and indeed the people of the world, without having the middleman of the salivating mainstream media. And of course, there's no denying that that is a benefit. There's no denying that the rank and file of the graduates of Pavlov's School of Journalism for the salivating mainstream media have been biased, have had a tilt, have attempted to push forth a propagandist narrative and agenda at the expense of the true ultimate wielders of popular sovereignty in this once thriving and flourishing representative republic of ours, we the people. But there's another aspect to it, because it's unconstrained, which means that you have to be exceedingly cautious to ensure that you aren't making any errors or mistakes when addressing the people. Trump, on the other hand, seems to be lackadaisical in his approach to Twitter. We've seen that he's gone out and just said some of the most vulgar and outlandish things, that he's put out untruths, and that this has come back to haunt him, that it essentially undermines and unravels any and all credibility that he might have otherwise had. And again, this is something you can't ignore. It's something that comes to the epicenter time and again, and it shows no signs of improving within the foreseeable future. But most of the time, he comes out and even contradicts the official narrative that his spokespeople have just released during their nearly daily press conferences. And yes, folks, we'll be getting into the changes that are about to rock the press corps here in a later segment. But I just want to touch on this now because it's this inconsistent narrative. If there's one thing that Trump has been consistent about ever since the debacle of the 2016 election, it's that he has been consistently inconsistent. And that it's destabilizing. It has a very negative effect and impact on the body politique of this, our beloved republic. And again, it's not something that we can ignore. It's not something that we can easily turn our backs on, but it is something that we have to keep in mind. Because when it comes to the arena of American politics, as we have oftentimes reiterated here at Radio Aviation Excellence, the Wright Flyer, perception, irrespective of whether it is an erroneous or false one or not, oftentimes matters more than reality itself. And therefore, he who controls the narrative and thereby gets to paint the picture that is put forth before the American people is the one that controls here. It's the one who truly exerts, wields, and handles power. Now, Trump did do something bizarre in response to this the other day. He said, maybe we should get rid of press conferences altogether. Now, folks, that's a bit of a troubled area for me. That's not something that I think is a good idea. It's not something that I believe works for the American people's best interest. But, you know, what we have always said here at Radio Aviation Excellence, the Wright Flyer, is that it's important to hear this from the actors themselves so that you can get what they say from their own lips, from their own mouths. And it's really important that we do that because it comes right to the epicenter of what matters in this once thriving and flourishing representative republic and vibrant community of popular sovereigns of ours. And so I'm going to go ahead and cue this up, and then we'll discuss it in even greater detail. So let me go ahead and switch over, and then we'll get it started. So here we go.
Moving so quickly that your communications department cannot keep up with you.
Yes, that's true.
So what do we do about that?
We don't have press conferences, and we do.
You don't mean that.
Well, just don't have them. Unless I have them every 2 weeks and I do it myself. We don't have them. I think it's a good idea.
Yeah.
First of all, you have a level of hostility that's incredible. And it's very unfair. Sarah Huckabee is a lovely young woman. You know Sean Spicer. He is a wonderful human being. He's a nice man.
Is he your press secretary today and tomorrow? Will he be
is,
tomorrow?
He is. He's doing a good job, but he gets beat up.
Will he be there tomorrow?
Yeah, well, he's been there from the beginning.
Yeah, he's been there from the beginning. That's great and wonderful and all. But it speaks to a deeper issue here. It speaks to an issue that we can't ignore, one that keeps coming to the surface. And, you know, we have discussed how Judge Jeanine Pirro had close ties to Trump before he even decided to run for the White House. This is something that she only disclosed once during the height of the primary process, when she went about smearing and lambasting anyone and everyone who wasn't Donald J. Trump. And that's because her husband, or ex-husband, had been the general counsel for Trump. Now, she only disclosed that once, and it hasn't really come up again. But, you know, it's that type of conflict of interest which smacks of a sort of media bias. And yes, folks, the Fox News channel is just as capable as being biased as any other member of the graduates of Pavlov School of Journalism for the salivating mainstream media. So really, we can't give them a pass on that. There's nothing to give them a pass on with respect to that. But what it tells us, beyond a shadow of the doubt, is that she was shocked, literally shocked, that Trump would suggest that he would cut back on press conferences, because that's just not the way things are normally done. That's not the standard modus operandi or operating procedures of the presidency of these United States of America. But remember that the press had been so giddy throughout the course of that disastrous debacle known as the 2016 presidential election cycle that this would be the election cycle in which conventional wisdom would be cast by the wayside. That's what they enjoy. That is what they've always looked towards as being a good thing, because they thought, oh, great, here's the big opportunity. Completely change the way that this nation operates, the way that the people in this country operate, and therefore we just play it that way. We're going to keep playing it that way as if that's a good idea, as if that is the way that things need to operate in this country. And again, nothing could be further from the truth. This is just their way of pushing forth that propagandist narrative and agenda, usually for the left. Well, Trump has been the left for a lot. But here's the interesting thing. It is important to note how even she was shocked when he said this about not doing press conferences anymore. Folks, we didn't like it when Obama refused to field questions from the media, or when Hillary Clinton refused to hold press conferences during the majority of her time on the campaign trail. You remember they asked, what is she hiding? What is that she is attempting to keep under wraps and is attempting to ignore and is not bringing to the surface? Well, I'll tell you, she was trying to avoid a perception or perspective being created by the media, and therefore she just did everything within her power to avoid having to deal with the press, because the press could easily torpedo her goals. And the same was true with Obama. They thought the press was treating them unfairly, even though we all know, when you examine the totality of the circumstances and with a modicum of objectivity, that the press has always been biased to the frothing at the mouth Fabian socialist leftist-controlled Democrat Party. That's not something that's going to change anytime in the near future. That's just, that's the way it has always been. And it shows no signs of changing within the foreseeable future. And so in their case, it's cowardice. In the case of them, it's cowardice, mere cowardice, as the press has been so extremely biased in the favor of the frothing at the mouth Fabian socialist leftists for generations. In Trump's case, however, it's because he wants to manipulate the narrative in totality. This is nothing new with the 45th president of these United States. He used to float bad news to the press with his real estate dealings using the alter egos of John Barron and John Miller. And if you recall, folks, as my first officer, Jeremy Grapington, had mentioned on last night's episode, that we were among the first to dig that up at the height of the primary process during the 2016 presidential election. We pointed it out. And we said that, look, that's not really exactly what we could consider as trustworthy behavior. It's not something that we would consider to be truthful or honest. In fact, nothing could be further from the truth. It's the type of behavior that we ought to readily consider as a negative, as something that goes against the hopes, dreams, and future aspirations of the American people. And how can I say that? Particularly with the amount of conviction and confidence that I do as I sit here speaking into this microphone, conveying this message unto you, our cherished listening passengers and audience members. It's because whenever you have somebody who that weaves this web of deceit, it's something that just can't be ignored. It's something that tells me that they're hiding something, that they have ulterior motives. And certainly that has been the case with Donald Trump. That has been what we've seen come to the surface time and again in repetitive fashion to the point of it reaching ad nauseum. And therefore, it makes it difficult to determine what we can trust, what we can't trust, what is the truth, what isn't the truth, and what it all means for us, both as a nation and people. We have to be cognizant and aware of the dangers that are lingering out there, that are looming out there, and we have to be aware of the, of the traps and snares that have been laid there by both sides of the political aisle, because they do have this ulterior motive. And that ulterior motive involves exponentially expanding the scope, breadth, power, influence, but above all, control of the federal government far beyond what our founding fathers ever originally intended for it to be, going back to the inception of this nation some 235 plus years ago. And that is why it is so important that we all foster that fluent and working knowledge and understanding of our shared United States Constitution, and by extension, our fundamental and inalienable God-given rights, because that empowers us to see the light of truth. And as Scripture so aptly put, ye shall know the truth, and the truth shall set ye free. But here's the thing. You noticed in the clip I just played, Trump said the only way he would do or should do press conferences is if it's done every 2 weeks and he's the one doing it. In other words, he's going right back to having John Barron and John Miller convey bad news. It's the same way that he ran his businesses. Well, that's not necessarily something that I believe works in our best interests. In fact, that is something that I find deceitful. I find it dishonest, but I also find it troubling in that he is once again believing that he has carte blanche to act in a unilateral fashion in his position as President of the United States. But folks, that is not the way that our system is designed. That's not the way that our founding fathers intended for it to work. It disregards that safety valve that they included with the 3 separate branches of government, that of the separations of power. We don't want an individual or a singular entity or one branch of government wielding absolute power, authority, and control, because that is the straight and narrow path to tyranny, despotism, but above all, oppression. And we can ill afford to allow that to take root in the land of the free and the home of the brave. It's just not something that plays out to our best interests. But folks, it should be a cause of alarm for all of us. Remember, whether we like the press or not, there's a reason why our founding fathers had included the freedom of the press within the confines of the First Amendment to the Bill of Rights, or first 10 amendments to our shared United States Constitution. It's because they realized that one of the things that had been operating against them throughout that long, drawn-out, and bloody affair known as the American War of Independence had been this attempt to shut down the press, this attempt to tax the papers on which their pamphlets were printed, so that the Crown and Parliament back in London could control the dissemination of information. A free people cannot have a government that does that. It does not work. And again, the main reason also that our founding fathers had included the guarantee of a free press to the true ultimate wielders of popular sovereignty in this once thriving and flourishing representative republic of ours is that the press is supposed to be a watchdog for the people. They're supposed to keep us abreast of the activities of the government and to ensure that the government isn't attempting to encroach upon or abridge our fundamental and inalienable God-given rights. And remember that one of the things that my first officer, Jeremy Grapington, and our first Air Marshal, Mr. Nelson Ward, and indeed yours truly, have reiterated on numerous occasions on previous episodes of our state-of-the-art radio program, is that without our rights, we are truly left with nothing. You see, the government is thereby wanting to perpetuate this leviathan of an administrative state that is well beyond anything that our founding fathers ever originally intended for the federal government to be. And without the press being free, it means that all of a sudden, the narrative is being a propagandist one peddled out by whichever regime is currently wielding the reins of political power. And believe me, folks, this can cut both ways. It always does. And yes, it is true that, unfortunately, the press hasn't been doing their job, that they have been remiss in their duties, obligations, but above all, responsibilities to the American people. However, when the government begins to become more secretive and opaque, it establishes or sets a dangerous precedent. Remember, should the other side ever get back the reins of political power, and rest assured they will, pendulum always swings, they will use this now established precedent to shut us out from the goings-on of their regime. Again, I'm a bit reminded of that old adage that what's good for the goose is good for the gander. Remember, we didn't like the lack of transparency with the former regime, that of Barack Hussein Obama. We thought that it was wrong. We lambasted him. We took every available opportunity to decry what he was doing. So why is it now that we are suddenly becoming hip with hypocrisy and saying it's okay that Trump can do this, because apparently now Trump is to be free from any and all responsibility for his words, deeds, and actions? Folks, that undermines our credibility as a political movement, ideology, and philosophy. It makes us come across as though we are sycophantic fools who have no idea what we're saying, no idea what the repercussions and ramifications of our actions are. No, we can ill afford to allow that to come to fruition. We cannot just sit idly by and ignore what is right there in front of the eyes of the shocked and horrified nation. You see, whenever the government operates outside of the proper scope and limitations of government as set out and mandated by the clear and concise language contained within the four corners of our shared United States Constitution, it holds us back. And therefore, this notion of Trump losing control of his agenda, losing control of the narrative, it really doesn't matter much, Because if that agenda and if that narrative goes against the supreme law of the land, which pursuant to Article 6, Clause 2, what is known in the common American vernacular as the Supremacy Clause, is none other than our shared United States Constitution, then it's void ab initio. Because anything that is contrary to the language of the Constitution is lacking the binding effect and power of law from its very inception. That's something we have to keep in mind. It's not something that we can ignore. It's not something that we can just treat nonchalantly as we have been. It is the duty, obligation, and responsibility of the American people in their capacity as United States citizens, whether they be natural born or naturalized, to proactively maintain and safeguard our fundamental and inalienable God-given rights, and the tools that are at our disposal to do so are laid out in the Constitution, and part of that is a free press. And you see, the other thing we have to keep in mind with respect to the free press is they're controlled by the free market. Where there's a niche or where there is a need for a conservative point of view to rise up, the market will satisfy that. However, we have seen that there has been this corruption of it, this bastardization of it, with this whole talk of fake news. But again, when we do our due diligence in our capacity as United States citizens, we can see through that. We can find the truth for ourselves. And it means that we read all pamphlets. You know, that was one of the things that great French philosopher and admirer of America and her halcyon days, Alexis de Tocqueville, said with respect to a free press. He said that the press in the United States had all sorts of outlandish and uncorroborated and unsubstantiated claims that would have driven any monarchical government in Europe, or any government in Europe for that matter, to instantly clamp down on that. To have state-run media basically control the complete and total narrative. But in the United States, they didn't have that because the American people were used to it. They knew what their duties, obligations, and responsibilities were, and they knew how to handle these issues. And therefore, they didn't just rise up or foment rebellion as the governments in Europe would think. In fact, the exact and polar opposite would be the case in the land of the free and the home of the brave. Because we, going back to the inception of this nation some 235 plus years ago, have an inherent and intrinsic distrust of centralized power and authority. Because if you recall, the founding fathers in that American War of Independence were literally fighting the consolidated and centralized power and authority of the British Crown and Parliament. And therefore, they truly did develop this revolutionary idea that the people are the sovereigns. And therefore, if the people are the sovereigns, the people's voice must be free from repercussions. Now, it's also thereby the responsibility of the American people to keep the press honest. And the way we do that is we compare sources. We look into primary sources. We, keep abreast of the issues. But it's as the great visionary Zygmunt Dobbs warned in his magnum opus Keynes at Harvard, that the frothing at the mouth Fabian socialist leftists would infiltrate everything. And then through the adoption of rather innocuous sounding but overzealous and draconian regulations, they'd make it so difficult for the American people to be able to carve out a living for themselves, to sustain the quality and standard of life that they had grown accustomed to, that it would just be nigh impossible for them to keep up with all of this. And that's what we have now. But in this, modern age, we can't afford to do that. Because it's easier now than ever to get information. But here's the thing. Organization is going to be the key that would help Trump recover his flailing administration. He is going to have to come out and proclaim that he will follow the Constitution. On top of this, he's going to have to stop that little authoritarian streak of his, acting as though he has the power to rule in unilateral fashion. Folks, that is part of the reason why we say that this is This requires us to foster a fluent and working knowledge and understanding of our shared United States Constitution, and thereby our fundamental and inalienable God-given rights. Because in so doing, we empower ourselves to see that the federal government was always intended to be one of strictly limited powers and authorities. However, given the current trajectory of the government, we see that the upper echelons of the federal government aren't acting in that fashion. And they haven't been for quite some time. And that is a problem. It is one that we cannot ignore. While the distractions of his own making, that of going out on Twitter and contradicting his own people, are bad enough, Trump is also going to have to learn to be a bit more diplomatic when dealing with the people that he's terminated. And yes, folks, in this case, I'm speaking of ousted Federal Bureau of Investigation, or FBI, Director James Comey, when he went out there and he said he was showboating. And I played that clip on a previous episode of our state-of-the-art radio program. But when you do that, when you go out and instigate these things and just make a horse's ass out of yourself, and pardon me for being crass, but that literally is the way that this plays out. That's literally the imagery that it creates. It's something that can't be ignored. It's something that just cannot be swept under the rug. Yet the gutless opposition party, or GOP, and its leadership from the detente wing are certainly trying to do that. They believe that it is their prerogative even to do that. But you know, the whole reason why a special counsel, that of Robert Mueller, has been appointed in the case of the lingering Russian scandal is because of the way that Trump terminated the former director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, or FBI, James Comey. Remember, Comey was the one who was leading the investigation into the alleged impermissible Russian connections between some of Trump's personnel during the 2016 presidential election cycle. And so, again, it creates a very dangerous perspective, a very dangerous perception that the frothing at the mouth Fabian socialist leftist-controlled Democrat Party is going to run with. They are going to attempt to make political hay out of this because they sense that there is blood in the water, and thereby that signals them to begin the feeding frenzy. Now, does that make it in the best interest of the American people? No. Far from it. But again, this is the disorganization of the 45th president of these United States of America and his administration coming back to hamper and to hinder the ability of a conservative agenda to go forth. But that's the thing, he's not even operating as a conservative. But also, as Jeremy and I have oftentimes reiterated on previous episodes of Radio Aviation Excellence, the Wright Flyer, perception within the arena of American politics usually matters more than reality itself. And again, we turn back to the great visionary Zygmunt Dobbs, who back in the 1950s and 60s warned that people are too busy trying to deal with the overzealous governmental regulations to keep abreast of the current events. And that is by design. That is what they are wanting to have come to the forefront and the epicenter, because they are trying to hold us back. They are trying to control the narrative, thereby allowing them to slip in the poison pill of their dark and twisted machinations and designs for this country that are diametrically opposed to the foundational image that our founding fathers had conjured up at the inception of this nation some 240 some odd years ago. And so we have to be cognizant and aware of it. And we can't just turn our eyes away from it. Thus, the rank and file of the graduates of Pavlov's School of Journalism for the salivating mainstream media will spin the narrative a certain way. And the vast majority of the true ultimate wielders of popular sovereignty won't see past the less deceitful narrative. And that's what they're banking on. That's what they're hoping for. That's what they are hoping they can do, to obfuscate the truth with subterfuge. But when you have both sides doing this, engaged in this intellectually disingenuous fluff and drivel, it undermines us all. It truly does. But here's the thing. One of the lingering problems for Trump is that he has this notion that he can control the narrative. And I can understand in the private sector and in the business world, when you're managing things or when you're trying to control something, you want to have hands-on at all levels. You almost are afraid to give up a modicum of control because you don't know what that does. It creates uncertainty, and uncertainty creates fear, and fear creates speculation, and some types of speculation within the business world are debilitating. They will undermine every effort that you go forward with, and it can really harm the business if you're not careful. And so I can understand this almost obsessive compulsive desire on the part of the president to try and control the narrative. But it's more than that. You can't be that way in a free and open and honest society like that of the United States of America, because by the very design of our government, it's not supposed to be consolidated. It's not supposed to be centralized. We don't want the president to be able to go out there and act in unilateral fashion, because that is the surest path to tyranny, despotism, but above all, oppression. And we can ill afford to allow that to take root in the land of the free and the home of the brave. And again, it's our duty, our obligation, and our responsibility as United States citizens to ensure that that sort of chicanery does not become the new established norm in these United States of America. That's literally all there is to it. But it's going to be difficult to overcome that. We have allowed our system of polity to devolve into a mere spectator sporting event, and therefore we want to be pom-pom waving cheerleaders, rah-rah shish kumbah for whomever our guy is. And then for the same things that we excuse our players for, we sit there and try and throw up the yellow card or throw a flag down on the field on them because they oppose us, because they belong to the other team. But what is really missing is the adherence and loyalty to the supreme law of the land, which is none other than our shared United States Constitution. You see, folks, that's what we can't escape. That is what we can't ignore. And that is what both of the two mainstay political parties are attempting to do. And that is certainly what a huge swath of Trump's proposed agenda for this nation entails as well. So it's not something that we can turn a blind eye to. You know, here's the thing. The simple fact of the matter is that the narrative is starting to get away from Trump. He's not able to control it like he thought he could. This is because the vast array of other responsibilities which are on his plate simply don't allow him the time to micromanage this like he could with his companies, nor do we want him to be able to. This is one of the reasons why Jeremy and I have stated that you simply cannot run the United States like you can, or you could, rather, a private business. There's far too much at stake here. And the bottom dollar isn't something a nation can focus on, because we have to consider our rights, which are non-negotiable. Despite this, Trump seems determined to stay the course, which is only working against his agenda overall. As we move from one scandal to another scandal with seemingly no time or space in between, it begins to undermine the Republican Party altogether. Any sense of trust has been lost to the shadow of these lingering scandals. We're still, the frothing at the mouth, Fabian socialist, leftist-controlled Democrat Party is loving this perceived weakness. They're going to use this as a blunt instrument to bludgeon the Republican Party to death in the 2018 midterm elections. And again, that does not play to our best interest. But here's an interesting thing, folks. Charles Krauthammer over there at the Quaff News Network, or Fox News Network, basically came out on the Tucker Carlson program the other evening, in which he discussed some of the things that he thought Trump would have to do in order to get his administration back on track. Krauthammer pointed to the fact that Trump was going to have to choose a new FBI director who has a reputation beyond repute. According to Krauthammer, the reason that Trump has to choose a so-called agreeable FBI director is because he needs to calm down some of the tensions that have ratcheted up within the nation's capital at Washington, D.C., and within the body politic of the nation itself. Thus, to Krauthammer, it's imperative that Trump start showing a more disciplined approach to his tenure as president. And folks, I think it's very important that we get this from the man himself, so that you have a chance to hear what he is saying from his own lips. And I've got the clip here, so I'm going to go ahead and get this set up so that you can hear it for yourself. And then we will discuss it in even greater detail after we have gone through this. So let me go ahead and cue this up now, and here we go.
His White House has been slowed down, if not immobilized, by recent events. Immigration reform and Obamacare repeal have been pushed off the agenda for now, replaced by constant flare-ups over James Comey, Russia, or simply the president's tweeting. But Trump is still the president, and his party still controls Congress for another 18 months at minimum. How can the White House get its mojo back and reclaim its freedom of action? This is a question that Charles Krauthammer has pondered. He's a writer, a columnist, of course, and a psychiatrist, and your favorite thinker, and he joins us now. So, Charles, what can the White House do? If you were to give them 5 pieces of advice, what would they be?
Well, I think you take your playbook from Bill Clinton. He's caught up in the Lewinsky scandal, and in his case, he knows he's lying from the very beginning.
Yes.
Keeps on lying. But he was able to keep a straight face, tried to keep his nose to the business he wanted to carry out. The famous statement, "I did not have sexual relations," ends with, "and now I'm going to go back to work."
Yes.
So he just pretended as if this thing was on the side, it was a distraction. He went back to work. So what Trump needs to do is to spend less effort and time and emotional energy on this, starting with you make an unimpeachable FBI director appointment. Right now, he needs to calm the craziness. I think he actually was helped by the appointment of this special counsel.
Yeah, okay. So maybe it's an important thing here that he do that. I'm not going to disagree that I don't think that he should try and bring things back down under control, but I'm going to disagree in so much as saying that essentially that this special counsel is beneficial to Trump. I think nothing could be further from the truth. I think that that is deleterious and detrimental for Trump. I think it plays against him. And again, that's not something that he should be able to take lightly. Unfortunately, it's something that shows no signs of improving within the foreseeable future. Folks, from everything that I have seen thus far, it doesn't appear that Trump is capable of acting in a disciplined fashion, even if he wanted to. And I'm not even sure that he wants to. I think part of the reason why he has such admiration for the Russian strongman and dictator there in Vladimir Putin with his Russian homeboys is because he, like the Russians, believes that chaos is something that he can strengthen himself with. You see, he uses chaos to bamboozle people. He uses chaos to get what he wants at the expense of others. But the United States of America, as we have oftentimes reiterated on previous episodes of Radio Aviation Excellence, the Wright Flyer, is a nation that is based off of the natural order of things, or what is known commonly as the natural law tenets, those things that form the bedrock foundation of our fundamental and free system of government, namely our rights. And when we go against that, and when we ignore those things, it is always to our own great detriment, and it is always at our expense. So we're going to have to be cognizant and aware of these things, and we're going to have to stand shoulder to shoulder in solidarity and unity and refuse to allow that to come to the epicenter, to refuse to allow that to become a new established norm within the American system of polity, because we can ill afford it. Particularly when you consider that the United States is in the grips of an identity crisis, coupled with a slew of constitutional crises brought about by generation after successive generation of failed government and public policy positions. You see, the political elites, those that currently wield the reins of political power on either side of the political spectrum, are thumbing their noses at us. They're doing everything in their power to further distance and divorce themselves from the supreme law of the land, our shared United States Constitution. And again, that is unacceptable. It goes against all that we hold near and dear in this once thriving and flourishing representative republic and vibrant community of popular sovereigns of ours. And again, folks, this is something that shows no signs of improving within the foreseeable future. We have to be proactive. We have to be willing, ready, and able to hold our officials and the media and ourselves and each other accountable for our words, deeds, and actions. Otherwise, the death spiral that currently grips this beloved republic of ours will not only continue unabated, it will be exacerbated with each and every passing day. We can ill afford to ignore this. Yet, the goalposts keep moving, and excuses keep being made. Now, sure, I can already hear the shrill tones of those who blindly follow Trump, like Ann Coulter, saying that of course he's disciplined. How else could he have made a real estate empire as he did? Firstly, he inherited that business and always had a helping hand to get it off the ground. Secondly, he wasn't disciplined in his approach with it. That's why he had so many businesses fail. Now, sure, yes, in the business world, before you can taste success, almost always you're going to experience failure. That's how you learn the market. And yes, taking risks is the best way to get gain. But what Trump was doing was he was gambling with other people's money. He wasn't dedicated to the actual achievements that he wanted. And I've actually seen reports that said if he had just taken that $1 million that his daddy, Freddie Drumpf, gave him and invested it, he'd have even more money, exponentially more money than he's had in the way that he ran his business empire. But again, the reason that he wasn't so disciplined was that he was merely a marketer. He didn't go about the nuts and bolts of actually managing the business and ensuring that it was solvent. And by the way, none of these businesses wound up being publicly traded. None of these businesses were traded on the stock market. They were all closely held. Again, secretive, to avoid public scrutiny. And again, that creates a perception. And not a good one. So I can't in good conscience say that Trump was disciplined in his approach to business. Nonetheless, when it comes to his public relations image, Trump believes that showing discipline in his approach would lose the supporters that he gained via the stage persona he created. Again, folks, in the arena of American politics, the notion of a perception matters more than reality. And unfortunately, it's not improving. It shows no signs of working because there is a lack of desire to change, a lack of desire to put the nation back on to the straight and narrow for prosperity. But here's the other thing. The other thing that Trump is going to have to do is completely cooperate with the special counsel, because now that Robert Mueller's on the case, we already know that Robert Mueller is a man with an impeccable reputation of being hard-nosed, just the facts, kind of like Joe Friday from Dragnet. Just the facts, ma'am. Well, that's kind of the way that Mueller does things. And so it means that it's a heightened step here. It's a heightened stage. And apparently, Trump has issued a new statement decrying the appointment of a special counsel, saying it hurts the country because it shows how we are not unified. Okay, well, here's the thing, Trumpy. Who is to blame for the great strains of divisiveness and division that grips the hearts, souls, and minds of the body politic of this once thriving and flourishing representative republic and vibrant community of popular sovereigns of ours? Again, this is him trying to blame everyone else for the ramifications and consequences that have arisen as a direct result of his own actions. That's childish at best. That's not something that we can embrace. That's not something that can be tolerated. It's not something that works in our best interests overall. But it's just what has happened. And, you know, there's no way around this, folks. And hell must be freezing over because Rhino extraordinaire Lindsey Graham actually got something right when he said that essentially this is now a criminal investigation. It means that Congress is going to be severely limited in any investigative process available to it because of the appointment of a special prosecutor. Or not just a special prosecutor, but the term they're using now is that of special counsel. But folks, it's essentially the same thing. It is literally the same thing. But I think it's important that we go ahead and bring up this from Graham himself so that we can hear it. Then I will discuss it in greater detail. So let me go ahead and cue this on up so that we can get started with it. Interesting. It's technical difficulties here, folks. Not sure why that froze up on me. I may just have to do it audio only, or what I can maybe try and do. Let's see. Really don't like it when it does that. Sorry, folks. Bear with me just for a second. There we go. I don't know why that had frozen up. All the joys of technology. Anyway, let me go ahead and start doing screen share. Okay. There it is. Good. And now I'll go ahead and cue it up.
It's now considered a criminal investigation, and Congress's ability to conduct investigations of all things Russia has been severely limited, probably in an appropriate fashion. So I think a lot of members want the special counsel to be appointed, but don't understand that you're pretty well knocked out of the game. And that's probably the way it should be. It was a counterintelligence investigation before now. It seems to me now to be considered a criminal investigation.
I can't tell you just how big that is. I can't tell you or stress just how important that is. That means that it's now in a much more dangerous place, a much more precarious place for the 45th president of these United States of America. And again, it's because what's happening here is the nature of that entire investigation has become all the more serious, all the more important, something that can't be ignored. And unfortunately, we are seeing it be ignored. It really is a problem that has been coming up time and again. And when we see the president attempt to recoil from that, then it only worsens the overall approach. It leaves us wanting. It leaves us destabilized. And folks, we can't be destabilized right now. There's far too much at stake here. And this is part of the reason why I think it's foolish to try and claim that the appointment of a special counsel is necessarily a good thing for Trump. Again, it's because it creates a very negative perception. And as we all know, the frothing at the mouth Fabian socialist leftist-controlled Democrat Party will use this to strengthen their position in the looming 2018 midterm elections. Now, while the elections shouldn't be the only consideration here, it certainly should weigh heavily on the titular head of the gutless opposition party, or GOP, Donald Trump. Remember, Trump hates being considered anything other than a winner. And thus, if you consider him a loser and anything like that, then he just melts down. He doesn't want to face facts or reality. That's too bigly for him. Or is that big league? Well, it doesn't really matter. The problem is, what he's got here is a losing position to allow the narrative to spin out of control as it currently has. It tarnishes his own reputation as well as that of the entire party, which he is the leading figurehead of. Of course, the rank and file of the graduates of Pavlov's School of Journalism for the salivating mainstream media are going to keep pushing this narrative in the weeks and months ahead. Simply put, they sense that there is blood in the water, and they are chomping at the bit to be able to go into a press feeding frenzy. They're like sharks. This is what they do. It's what they have always done. And it's really bad because they control the narrative. They keep pushing us back. They keep hampering and hindering us. And it shows no signs of improving within the foreseeable future. And here's the thing. Sure, there will be aspects of this which are fake news. That being said, it doesn't mean that things will go the way the president is hoping. As I have mentioned before, this is a bit like Aesop's fable of the boy who cried wolf. He keeps crying about the media and the press far too often. And it's been utilized in such a way as to have lost all of its meaning, all of its punch. It undermines Trump the more he continues to use the same excuses in a repetitive fashion ad nauseum. The sad truth is, folks, that in this situation, Trump is his own worst enemy. He lacks the discipline and control to ensure that the narrative cannot be utilized against him by his foes. And they are really doing that. And unfortunately, it shows no signs of improving within the foreseeable future. And here's the thing. I'll be the first to admit that the rank and file of the graduates of Pavlov's School of Journalism for the salivating mainstream media are going nuts over Trump. They are just losing control. They are just throwing fits. But above all, they're attempting to inflate his negatives far beyond what they truly are. But I wouldn't be forthright with you if I said Trump hasn't done anything wrong here. His shady approach to things undermines his credibility, and I don't think that this is something which plays out in the best interest of the true ultimate wielders of popular sovereignty in this once thriving and flourishing representative republic of ours, we the people. To my mind, this is just another clear demonstration of the fact that neither one of the two mainstay political parties are operating with the best interests of the American people at heart and in mind. It reminds me again of the sagacious warning of the father of our nation, George Washington, who stated in his 1796 farewell address that we cannot allow ourselves to break down into disparate and competing factions as we lose sight of the overarching picture of what truly matters in our republic, namely our Constitution, which, pursuant to Article 6, Clause 2, or the Supremacy Clause, is none other than our shared United States Constitution. You see, when we ignore the Constitution and try to act in a unilateral fashion, that's when the government begins to transform into a rogue and tyrannical entity that is also illegitimate. We have seen the government assume the course of this for generation after successive generations. Folk, if we truly want to see American prosperity restored, we're going to have to come together in our capacity as United States citizens and state in no uncertain terms that we wholly reject this attempt to undermine all that we hold near and dear, both as a nation and people. We do not have a choice in the matter. Unfortunately, we see that Trump is taking the wrong step here. It has been announced that Press Secretary Sean Spicer will no longer be delivering daily press conferences. While many of the loudest supporters of Trump will cheer at the thought of this, there's something important to keep in mind. As I mentioned in one of the previous segments, the reason that we have a guaranteed free press is because they are supposed to serve as a check on the power and authority of the federal government. This makes sense when we consider that our founding fathers considered the government as nothing short of a necessary evil. In other words, they didn't trust the government. Worse yet, they would be appalled to see how much power and authority the American people have allowed the government to assume upon itself. Remember, based on the natural law tenets, which form the bedrock foundation of our shared United States Constitution, as well as our Republican form of government, the federal government is one of limited powers. That is, in order for the actions of the government to be lawful and legitimate, it must trace its governing power and authority back to a power which is specifically enumerated unto it by the clear and concise language of the Constitution. Otherwise, we allow the agent provocateurs of tyranny and despotism and oppression to work their twisted deeds in the land of the free and the home of the brave. And here's the thing. To ensure that the Constitution is followed, it's taken a step further in that there has to be a statute which enables the government to act within the purview of that constitutionally enumerated power. They can't just claim it. Thus, every law must state where, within the purview of the Constitution, that the government derives its power to act. Any time that the government steps outside the proper scope and bounds of the Constitution, it is in breach of contract. Well, it's the job of a free press to root out where the government has done this and to inform the popular sovereigns of exactly what is going on. And when we fail to do that, and when we undermine that, we literally place the nation in a precarious position. in a position that doesn't work for us, in a position that undermines us completely. And that cannot be allowed to continue. So Trump decided that it would be a good idea to scale the presence of the White House press secretary back. Because again, he's starting to lose control of the narrative. He's beginning to be hampered by a sort of thing that is holding him back, that is really weakening him, and it can't be ignored. It just cannot be allowed to continue because, again, it undermines everything that we are hoping to accomplish and achieve. So, why does it matter that he's scaling this back? Because when you undermine the press, you allow the president to create his own narrative. And that's not necessarily a good thing. Imagine if Obama was able to do that without the help of the press, because he had the help of the press. But remember, he cut them off, particularly when it was going into some of the more seedy things like the NSA investigation. It would have been awful. It would have basically taken us down a path to where we wouldn't have even known what the dangers were. And I don't think we can afford that. Because again, when we recall the sagacious advice of that founding father, Sam Adams, we do best when we are a free nation and people. We do our best when we are not inhibited by overzealous governmental regulations and machinations. But it's not easy to do that. It's not easy to stay on top of this stuff, particularly when it's being utilized in such a fashion as to weaken us. Folks, at this juncture, in all that is happening, the president should be attempting to be more transparent than ever. However, part of the distraction that Jeremy had mentioned on last evening's program was that we are being conditioned to believe that anything and everything that is said against this administration is nothing short of fake news. That's the distraction. It's not this other stuff that they're talking about. It's not these other claims that they have brought to the forefront and to the epicenter. It's that what they're really trying to do is clamp down on the narrative, to completely control the narrative, to have the last say, to be the end-all, be-all purveyors of the message. And I'm not sure, again, that this operates in our best interest. I'm not sure that this is wise. And I don't think that that's how you get your agenda back on track, because it's going to make your opponent scream all the louder. They're going to sit there and say whatever the hell they can to try and keep things under wraps. Well, you can't do that. And you know what it really is, folks? It's plain and simple propaganda. It is a way for Trump to attempt to control the narrative from within and to keep his followers blindly loyal to him. But remember, we had lambasted Barack Hussein Obama for failing to hold press conferences. We asked then, just as we should ask now, what was he attempting to hide? Folks, this is the sort of authoritarian strain that we simply cannot accept here in the land of the free and the home of the brave. I don't believe that this would help accomplish his goal of, quote unquote, making America great again. If anything, It is going to deepen the divides which already exist within the body politique of this once thriving and flourishing representative republic and vibrant community of popular sovereigns of ours. And again, we have already been far too divided in this nation to continue. Of course, the justification I'm sure the president is going to try to use to convince us of here is that the media is just lying about it. Oh, they are incapable of telling the truth. They are insufferable, pathological liars. And that is the way it has been for far too long. And yes, the press did this to themselves, but it is basically being utilized as a crux to tear us down. Us being, of course, dyed-in-the-wool constitutional compositionists. You see, we can't ignore all of this because it's being utilized to tear us down at any available given opportunity. But here's something really interesting. We know that the administration is attempting to be the sole source of any and all information that happens. It's making things occur behind closed doors. And one of the realities that we have seen throughout the relatively brief yet illustrious history of this, our beloved nation, is that anytime things are done behind closed doors, or when access to the press is curtailed, it is not in the best interest of the American people. I think one of the greatest examples of this was the Alien Sedition Act, which was passed in secretive fashion during the administration of our second president, John Adams. The people recoiled in horror when they learned the extent of overreach that existed within those tyrannical acts. It cost Adams dearly in the election of 1800. Well, we have the midterm elections of 2018 looming just around the corner, folks. Do not think that this will sit well with the American people, with the vast majority of the American people at that. Donald Trump is not the most popular president in United States history. I know that that's what his surrogates attempt to say. I know that that is the image that they attempt to convey to us. But his approval ratings are in the tank. They are just dilapidating. They are disintegrating before his very eyes. And so again, that doesn't play out well. That doesn't work to his best interests. So how did we wind up here? We wound up here because we aren't seeking to strictly adhere to the clear and concise language contained within the four corners of our shared United States Constitution. But here's the thing. It is the duty, obligation, but above all responsibility of each and every one of us in our capacity as United States citizens to be stalwart in the defense of our fundamental and inalienable God-given rights. I understand that the mainstream media is a nest of vipers. Nonetheless, I consider the government to be an even worse nest of vipers. They have the ability to destroy our lives. They are the ones who have been making things worse for generation after successive generation. And folks, you have to keep in mind with all of this that the press can be controlled via the free market. The press is not an end-all be-all system like government can be. And of course, part of the problems that we're encountering both as a nation and people is that far too many of us are turning to the government as some sort of an end-all be-all solution for the cornucopia of problems that we have encountered in recent history. We cannot believe that the government is a good solution. And unfortunately, that's what the 45th president of these United States of America believes in. That's part of the reason why we're seeing this kind of rampant corruption come to the surface again. Even though he ran on draining the swamp. Well, it's the same type of chicanery and nonsense that we saw when nasty Pelosi stood in front of the cameras back in 2006 and boldly proclaimed that that the culture of corruption was over now that the Democrats held a majority in the House of Representatives. Of course, nothing wound up being further from the truth. Here we are. More concrete, irrefutable evidence that both of the two mainstay political parties are not operating with the best interests of the true ultimate wielders of popular sovereignty in this once thriving and flourishing representative republic of ours, we the people, at heart or in mind. And does that mean that we can now finally dispel with this myth that voting for the lesser of two evils makes things better? But it's not going to happen that. It's not. You know, in this era of the internet, there really isn't any reason for the president to close off the press. Rather, he should continue the press briefing and correct any lies via his own channel. Isn't that what he tried to do during the election cycle? Or at least isn't that what his surrogates and supporters had claimed he was trying to do? I thought so. I thought that was clearly the intention they had there. And you know, that process, it works better than creating the perception of being closed off and secretive. And again, folks, we have to be careful not to be hip with hypocrisy here. Because we had lambasted Barack Hussein Obama for refusing to hold press conferences, for lying to the press, for being certainly less than transparent. And granted, folks, that is a gross understatement with respect to the sort of chicanery that continued nonstop at the height of Obama's regime. But folks, we point all of this out because it comes back to the epicenter, demonstrating that there is a problem with both parties. They both have ulterior motives, none of which are in line with or connected with the hopes, dreams, and future aspirations of the true ultimate wielders of popular sovereignty, we the people. And this instability that we're encountering, it's just part of that partisan game, where they keep playing the game, where they keep attempting to convince us that they are the end-all, be-all solutions to the cornucopia and plethora of problems that is facing us both as a nation and people, when in fact nothing, and I truly mean nothing, could be further from the truth. Again, this is why it is absolutely imperative that we foster a fluent and working knowledge and understanding of our shared United States Constitution and thereby our fundamental and inalienable God-given rights. Because clearly, both of the two mainstay political parties have assumed a position that is diametrically opposed to everything that we stand for. And as a result, we are seeing the seeds of tyranny, despotism, but above all, oppression take root in the land of the free and the home of the brave, and we can ill afford to allow that to come to fruition. Now, maybe what is happening here with respect to Sean Spicer being pulled back is just the fact that he's preparing to step down. That is certainly what some of the rumors that have been going around the White House and has been reported on by the Wright Scoop and various other sources and outlets out there. And I can only imagine, even as Trump suggested there in that Judge Pirro clip that we played in one of the previous segments, that it has got to be exhausting to go in front of the rank and file of the graduates of Pavlov's School of Journalism for the salivating mainstream media day after day, facing a deluge of their spears and their missiles that are hurled at him, And then it has got to be taxing to also see that everything that you say will ultimately be contradicted by the man you are serving. You see, again, ye shall know the truth, and the truth shall set you free, as Scripture so poignantly demonstrates. Therefore, those agent provocateurs of untruth, of falsity, the Lord of the lies, that is the sort of thing that undermines the credibility of our nation, that places this administration off of its course with respect to the agenda that it has for the nation. And it allows the frothing at the mouth Fabian socialist leftist controlled Democrat Party to literally chomp at the bit here, to think that they are now within grasp of doing a full tilted push towards socialism. And of course they're going to think this, because we have two big government parties undermining the hopes, dreams, and future aspirations of the American people at every available and given opportunity. And as long as this is allowed to continue unfettered, unchecked, and unchallenged, the worse this problem will become, day by day, hour by hour, minute by minute. We see another scandal approaching. We see another media narrative continue. We see that there is not a modicum of truth in the narratives and agendas of either side of the political aisle. Is it any wonder then, folks, that there are so many within the body politique of this our nation who have become completely disenfranchised, completely alienated from our system of polity? They see it as just a hotbed of corruption. They see it as nothing short of a platform for liars to continue to peddle their narrative, irrespective of the deleterious and detrimental impact that it has on the nation at large. You know, we can't ignore this, because it is growing worse by the day. It is putting us in this untenable and unsustainable situation. So maybe Sarah Huckabee Sanders is being prepared to now become the new press wonk for Trump. We've already seen more of her, particularly in light of the sacking of James Comey, and then with the announcement of the appointment of Federal Bureau of Investigation, or FBI Director Robert Mueller, as the special counsel with regard to all of these Russian connections. And she doesn't seem to mind so much being contradicted. And she doesn't seem to mind the arrows of the press. After all, her father is that bass player, former Arkansas governor and big government champion, Mike Huckleberry. Okay, so she's all right with all of this. She's not going to step back from it. She's not going to disregard it. She's going to go up there, toe the line, until she herself eventually finds it so morally reprehensible that she steps back from it. Or it's going to be like what Trump suggested in that Pirro piece that he did over there at the Fox News Network, in which he said that he will conduct it. Once again, bringing back the alter egos of John Barron and John Miller. Great, wonderful. But I fail to see how this is going to do anything to help place the nation back on track. I fail to see how this is going to open any doors for the agenda of the Republican Party to be restored. And I think one of the major reasons for this is that the Republican Party has abandoned all of the time-honored values, principles, and institutions that it stood for and advocated for since the 1964 presidential election cycle. That we must recall that Trump had said in smug fashion that it is the Republican Party, not the Conservative Party, as if he was attempting to suggest that conservatives have no place in the Republican Party. Well, believe me, when it comes to the midterm elections, this failing to live up to the great litany of promises that they've made in election cycle after successive election cycle is going to depress turnout for the Republicans, meaning it's going to hold it down, that it's going to be less than normal, that we might lose our majority in the House. But at this point, what point does it make? I mean, what difference will it make? If they're not going to stand up for anything, if they're not going to champion their people, if they're not going to enact the will of their constituents as they are constitutionally obligated to do, then it's like, with friends like that, who needs enemies? With representatives like that, who needs an opposition? It's as though they'll just hold hands together in a commune and sing Kumbaya frickin' ya. But that's not what they said they were going to do. That's not what they had promised to do. And the American people are getting livid. We're getting sick and tired of this, as we so rightly should, because we are sick and tired of being lied to, of only having these feckless, spineless weasels of politicians, and that includes the president, paying lip service to us at the election cycle and discarding and ignoring us all the rest of the time. Well, enough is enough. The corruption within this government knows no bounds. The swamp, folks, is not being drained, as so many had proclaimed that it would be under the tenure of the 45th president of these United States of America. I wish that that wasn't the case. I wish that he had chosen to govern as a conservative, but we see that nothing could be further from the truth, that he has not lived up to it, and that he is now reining back access to the press. Yes, the press are morons, but I thought he was a great negotiator. I thought that was what so many of his loudest acolytes and surrogates had convinced us of, or had attempted to convince us as they pushed us to join a tyranny of false unity, that he was. The bigliest, greatliest negotiator that has ever walked the face of God's green earth. Then why is he running from the press? Why is he not using his press secretaries to create a consistent message that the press cannot undermine? Well, because that was not his goal. Like the Russians, as I said earlier, he basks in chaos. He sees chaos as a way to get what he wants, irrespective of the harm that it causes the American people. You see, he thinks that he can continue to play his con game just as he always did with his seedy business dealings back when he was within the private sector. And again, it goes right to the heart of why my first officer, Jeremy Graventon, and I have oftentimes reiterated on previous episodes of Radio Aviation Excellence, the Wright Flyer, that you cannot run the United States of America as a business, because our fundamental and inalienable rights, which were endowed to us by our Creator, the God of nature himself, are non-negotiable. But Trump is still acting as though everything's negotiable, and if he can't get his way, he's going to cut ties because he doesn't like to be thought of as a loser. So what? Grow up. Pucker up, buttercup. Pull yourself up by the bootstraps and do what you promised to do. That's not going be the outcome. That is not going to be the way that things play out here, because he is not dedicated to that. He is throwing a Trumper tantrum, to bring up that old line created and coined by Texas Senator Ted Cruz at the height of the primary process of that disastrous debacle and fiasco known as the 2016 election cycle. Folks, we tell you all of this because it is important that we stand together and foster that fluent and working knowledge and understanding of our shared United States Constitution, and thereby our fundamental and inalienable God-given rights. That empowers us to see through the subterfuge, to see past the obfuscation of the truth, and to root out the causes that are harming us. And the key to placing this nation back onto the path to prosperity has been with us since the birth of our nation some 240 plus years ago. It is our Constitution. We need to get back to strict adherence to it at all levels of government. Because then and only then, will we be freed from the chains and shackles of governmental tyranny, despotism, but above all, oppression. With that said, it is time for us to begin our descent. I'm going to go ahead and send the flight attendant back with one last round of alcohol. Folks, she won't get off of that agenda, because if she does, you have my permission to push her out of the plane. As always, I'm your captain, Randy Wright, and I want to thank you for choosing to fly the Wright Flyer. Should you have any questions, comments, concerns, or even topic suggestions, please feel free to leave them either here on the comment section of our YouTube page, or on our Google Plus page, or even on our Facebook page. And on top of that, I invite you to follow us over on Twitter with the Twitter handle @RadioAviationEX. One more time, folks, that's @RadioAviationEX. And there you will find the departure board that lists my Twitter account, as well as the personal Twitter account of my first officer, Jeremy Grapington. You will find the Blogspot account, which is just chock full of useful information. And just as you will find in the description section of today's program, you will find a link to the Cafe Press account. Folks, at the Cafe Press account, we have all sorts of trinkets and goodies and novelty items, either with our original Radio Aviation Excellence, the Wright Flyer logo, or our First Class Passenger logo, or the two Uplifting America logos. And you'll find them on hats, shirts, shoes, jewelry, bumper stickers, watches, clocks, tote bags, laptop sleeves and protectors, phone sleeves and protectors, thermoses, mugs, you name it, all there, all at reasonable prices. With such a wide array of products, you simply cannot go wrong at the Cafe Press account. Once again, folks, thank you for being with us today. And if you have not done so yet, please go ahead and subscribe. We welcome all subscribers here at the Wright Flyer. Your input is always cherished as well. Thank you again, folks. We hope to see you again next time. Please do take care.